Okay, so welcome to this recording. I'm Adrienne and I am delighted to be joined by Matthew Drewitt. Do you prefer Matt or Matthew?
That is absolutely fine. Thank you, Adrienne.
Fantastic. And so Matt is joining us today to tell us a little bit more about his career in architecture. And interestingly, you've just started a new role, so you're only 2 months into a new role, so I suspect we will touch on that just a little bit as well. How's the new role going?
Really well, thank you. Yeah, thoroughly enjoying the transition away from traditional practice. Is a role I've been familiar with for nearly a decade, so it's a little bit of a step change, but as your students will come to learn, there's a lot of cross-pollination and skills that you take across different factions of the industry.
Okay, so before we get on to what you're doing now, can I just ask you to give us a how did you get here? Just a bit of a summary of your career.
Absolutely. Let me just bring that up for you. So yeah, I guess I'll link it back to the current role. So my current role is working within the Government Property Agency as both an architect and a designer. The GPA, as we're known, is an executive agency of the Cabinet Office, and our mission statement is to act as an enabler for the delivery of civil service transformation. So what that means in reality is supporting the creation of a modern government hub all across the United Kingdom, improving the types of spaces that civil servants work from and driving greater value for the taxpayer. So day to day, my role involves ensuring design work is aligned to the government's workplace design guide, the supporting technical annexes, and providing guidance to the design team, as well as brief writing and acting as a client point of contact. So it's a broad role, and it draws upon experiences I've built up in traditional practice over the last decade or so. Albeit my role and my focus in this role is more streamlined on the specifics of the Government Property Agency. Just in terms of progression from part 1 to part 3 and beyond, I think it's intrinsically linked to the type of practice and organization you work for. So when you complete your part 1, your part 2, type of practice you work for, I worked for the same practice for 5 years, all the way through the end of my part 1 to the end of my part 3. And it was a very large practice with hundreds of people, all from different backgrounds, all with different experiences in industry. And I was very fortunate in that I was able to absorb knowledge from a broad church of professionals. So it may be the type of practice one joins after completion of part 1 is much smaller, and therefore the responsibilities to manage smaller projects are put on your shoulders much sooner than, say, in a large firm where the contract values run into the millions. So when I started as a part 1 year out student, my creativity, ability to draw, ability to visualize, ability to ideate were all strings on my bow that I'd picked up in university, but also recognized by senior leadership and identified, and they enabled me to develop those in practice. And I suppose, I left architecture school thinking I had a firm grip on how to design a good building. But in reality, the commercial world is very different. And I was able to learn how best to apply my skills in the context of a large commercially focused organization. That doesn't mean design was not front and center, far from it. But it focuses the mind on how best to convey and sell ideas so that they do in fact leave the drawing board rather than remain a relic to one's imagination. So architecture school rightly teaches the ability to think critically and often on a macro scale, whereas the reality of industry is that you'll likely be problem solving on a micro scale for a client's particular needs and demands. As your career progresses, you learn to couple your critical thinking with sound business acumen. The world outside architecture school is very numbers focused, and that doesn't mean that ideas don't gestate beyond the fetal status. It just requires the ability to sell and convey them in a manner which gets clients buy-in. And I've suggested that you'll learn, just as in life, that to achieve anything, you need excellent relationships in a multidisciplinary team. And being able to see beyond small issues and look more outwardly on the bigger picture will craft you into both a great designer, but also a great leader. Responsibilities will find their way to you, and often at a time when your senior colleagues identify strengths in your skill set, where they're able to reward you with more autonomy and ownership of deliverables. Over time, your confidence in managing workloads, leading certain work streams, and taking initiative will grow as a consequence. And that's why I think the word architect is perhaps, in my view, a bit too generic when describing the role one undertakes in practice. Not all architects are great designers. Some are more technically focused, some are more business driven, some are great salespeople, and some are just a mix of all. But the key, though, is recognizing your skill set early on. What are your natural strengths and how may they bring value to an organization? That doesn't mean you're unable to improve in other skill sets, but it's important to work on your strengths, just as in any form of life. So early on in my career, I was fortunate enough to work on projects of national significance in practice, with projects valued at hundreds of millions of pounds. I've also worked on much smaller projects and smaller community-focused buildings, as well as projects of national and regional significance elsewhere in the United Kingdom. But each of them has given me a new perspective on our industry, on our country, and the issues that affect people all across the United Kingdom. And some of the key things I've drawn from that are that scale, quality, location are ever changing, but the role of designers is to create the best possible space we're able to within the constraints set by our clients and paymasters. Knowing when a project is very commercially driven will save you the heartache and wasting time proposing ideas that will be met with resistance, but equally having the ability to identify a client who is open-minded to a vision is integral. So being clear about the distinction is important. Outside of architecture school, businesses need revenue to thrive. And this is often sadly overlooked when viewed in the wider context of architectural practice. And I suppose to surmise that, I heard a great saying once, which is, we don't do good architecture to make money, we make money to do good architecture. And the lesson I took from that is that we must find the balance in practice to be commercially focused enough to generate good revenue, such that time is able to be invested into projects which often have the greatest impact, but perhaps are less fruititious financially.
That's fantastic. So God, there's so much going on in there. So what I'm taking from that particularly is the idea of being really alert to that commercial awareness. And as you say, sort of moving out of your academic space, almost like a sponge, ready to actually understand and make the connections. And those connections are both the financial ideas and funding and where stuff is coming from, but also the people that you're working with, the communities that you're working for effectively in the designs that you're making. And I love that idea about architecture being about creating a good project, being something that then creates the space for potentially something that is more risky, is more challenging, and may not be immediately seen as financially viable or appealing, but it's actually that cyclical space that you're creating in the design.
Indeed.
Oh, it's really, yeah, absolutely fantastic. And thinking about, so you talked a lot there about, kind of that absorbing, understanding how all of these teams are working and who the stakeholders are, and you must be dealing with so many kind of push-pull levers in the work that you do on a daily basis. I guess, did it feel like there were stages in that progression, or was it because you stayed within one organization from your part 1 to part 3 that it felt much more like a fluid sort of development to gaining your full accreditation?
Yeah, I was very lucky in that I think working within the same organization, they were able to take me from, I would say, a fairly embryonic point in my career as a young 20, 21-year-old or so, and grow me into both a designer but also an architect, because architects are not just designers. One has to be aware of the legalities involved in contract management and the consequences on business through decision making. So these are all aspects to the title of architect, if you like, that aren't commonly associated to it, which is why I think that ability to learn and draw upon experiences of others in practice is so important. And so, you know, I learned most of those skills in one firm, but I have many colleagues and friends who took a very different approach and perhaps joined a small firm or a large firm, transitioned between the two on their journey to accreditation. Some even went away and moved to contractors, and then actually came back towards traditional practice. So there are many different routes available to those seeking full accreditation.
And in this new role, you were saying before we actually started that we pressed the record button. You were talking about this as being, you know, a really exciting space to be working in this new role. And I guess that, you know, you've just alluded to that. There's a breadth out there that it sounds like you feel is underestimated for those just leaving, maybe from their part ones or part twos, just not seeing how many directions they can take their qualification in and their practice in.
Indeed, yeah. I mean, I've always, so far at least in my career, stayed within the realms of construction. I've worked for the last decade or so in traditional practice and taken on a new role which absorbs those skills but asks you to kind of regurgitate them in a different context. Still a practicing architect, but utilizing those skills in another way. As I say, friends and colleagues of mine have gone to work on the contractual side of the arrangement. I've had others who left after part one and have gone into set design or experience design, or taken their skills into other industries. I've even got a friend who works in finance. Though that skill set, the broad range of skills you learn on the various stages of the course, whether that be part one, part two, or part three, they're so applicable in many different environments and attractive to employers. So if one doesn't feel that they want to pursue a career in traditional practice as an architect, there are so many options available to you.
And that's so important, I think, to remember that. And if you think about the strengths and the skills, not just the technical skills, but you talking about ideation, that creative thinking, the problem solving. There's so much going on, as you say, that can translate into different careers. It's I also know a former architect who moved into television set design and builds MRIs out of MDF and things like that. So much more going into that kind of design end of things. I wanted to ask you, I'm going to take you back now and to that young 21-year-old and embarking on those early stages of your qualification journey, and particularly when you were in university. What would you tell your former self in terms of, you know, kind of go out and do this, do more of that? What would you do at university differently? Sorry, that was a ridiculously long and rambled question.
No, not at all. I suppose when at university, it's easy to fall into a silo, sort of singular way of thinking, of behaving, of reacting to issues. In life and in your careers, you'll work with many people from many disciplines. It's really important to remember that an architect or designer's take on the world is just that. It's one person's particular view. I'm not suggesting you don't mix with other architecture students, but it's important to immerse yourself in other realities beyond your zone of comfort. Go out in the world, travel. That doesn't always mean abroad. Get on a train, find new places and communities, explore the built environment. Your upbringing, socioeconomic status, and view on the world as a result of your childhood will limit your ability to critically think if you're not cognizant of life beyond what you're familiar with. Explore the regions in this country, find out what's working, what isn't. What are the searching questions of our time affecting different communities? See how people live, how they work, how they travel. To give you an example, I was born and raised in London, very dense city with incredible transport infrastructure and a centuries-old economic system which has evolved into a modern cosmopolitan playground for new ideas to flourish. Contrast that with where I live now, Nottingham, a city and region with great history, 2 world-class universities, some of the world's great sporting institutions, including Nottingham Forest and Trent Bridge, but equally a city of low density, a city centre which, like many across the UK, is struggling with the transition post-pandemic, post-Amazon, post-2008, and a city that suffers from brain drain due to a lack of opportunity. And if you contrast that with Manchester, a city that has actively promoted city centre living, encourage large businesses to establish themselves in the city core, and a city offering an alternative to the primate city of London. Our role as architects and designers is to identify challenges and use them as opportunities to promote change, be that on a macro or micro scale. At an impressionable time in your lives, make sure you explore and understand that there is a world beyond what you know, and in doing so, you'll become better designers for it, in my opinion. Consider routes beyond traditional practice. I know we just touched upon that. The industry has opened up much beyond purist architectural practice nowadays, and it's really important to keep your career paths wide open. And I think we live in a very fast changing world and need to accept the reality that we'll have multiple careers over the course of our lifetimes, which is something I didn't expect 10 or 12 years ago.
So there's something there about almost you're talking about a social responsibility of the architect and actually that, yeah, aware that what's in your head has to operate in the world and in communities. So separate from it being something that works financially for the business model, but it's actually that responsibility that people need to, this is people's environments you're playing around with here. And yes, absolutely, as careers consultants, we try and sort of slam home the message on a regular basis that you're likely to have at least 3 careers over the course of your working life, if not more, or there's that sort of slow evolution from one discipline into related careers. So yeah, absolutely vital to kind of bear that in mind. And I like that idea as well, because it means if it's not going right for you, you then think hard about where your strengths are and actually where you want to go next with them.
Indeed.
So absolutely, yes. You talked already a lot about the kind of interconnectedness and the number of people that you're actually working with on a daily basis, and how important it is to kind of take account of other people's perspectives and skills and knowledge. That kind of slightly brings me on to my next question, which is that idea of building networks, and again, it's something that we really try and encourage from an early point in people's degrees, you know, to sort of don't be afraid to reach out to former Cambridge students or recruiters who are quite happy to discuss with you kind of your ideas and your aspirations. How do you approach networks? What advice would you give for building networks whilst somebody may be still quite early on in their career?
Yeah, I think networking is really important, but so is the right type of networking. So if you are networking, network with purpose, have an aim. What am I going to get out of this? And what value am I going to bring the person I'm networking with? And I think it's a misconception sometimes that networking isn't always about finding a new job or finding new business. Quite often it's about learning from others, or at least it is for me. What are they doing well? How are they navigating certain situations? And how am I able to implement those lessons in my own life or career? So make sure you network with people who have a shared interest. It's important that you're able to find commonalities with one another in order to build meaningful bonds. be present and don't spread yourself thinly. A network isn't about knowing hundreds of people, it's about understanding 5 to 10. Building good relationships takes time, and trust is hard to earn. So focus on being reliable and competent rather than omnipresent to the masses. And remember, being a good networker is as much about listening as it is talking.
Absolutely, absolutely. I love that. That's such a good summary of what good looks like in networking. And when you were still kind of early on in your career, I mean, obviously you're involved with REBA from an early stage because it is charting your professional accreditation journey. But did you engage actively in those kind of professional spaces when you were still early days?
Yeah, I think I was very fortunate working for whom I did at the time. That one of the directors actually went on to be the RIBA president during my time in office. Um,
Useful.
Very useful. But prior to that, we would often have seminars and conferences in the RIBA's headquarters in Portland Place. That was just by virtue of the fact I was based in London, but there are regional offices all over the United Kingdom, and actually I think the reach has gone beyond that. I think as a youngster, I was quite encouraged when I used to obviously engage with the architectural literature. So I still every morning I've got this habitual thing about reading the AJ before I do any work. So I wait till the articles upload in the morning and I make sure I sift through them, so that much the same way as people read a news application on their phone, my news app is the Architect's Journal, Building Design Magazine. And I like to stay engaged in that way. So whilst you might not have an immediate network of people, literature can also be part of your network.
Absolutely. And it gives you as well that, I mean, again, we go right back to the beginning of the conversation talking about commercial awareness. That's partly about just being cognizant of what's going on and who's doing what, and what's exciting, what new legislation is coming this direction, all incredibly valuable for the kind of application and interview stage in securing those first roles, as well as keeping on as a very good habit. Can I just say, Matt, that's top habit.
Indeed.
And sticking to the kind of early career stage in particular, there seems to be a lot of debate about the CVs and portfolios. And as a careers consultant, I've seen, many architecture CVs that are works of design primarily and content less so. And obviously we regularly get questions about portfolios and how best to kind of present examples of work. I'm just wondering what advice you would give on those two elements of application.
Absolutely. So I think CVs and portfolios they're a bit like meals in some way. Thousands of them get produced and consumed every day, and they're actually an extension to our existence in the modern world, in my opinion. LinkedIn is a live CV and portfolio in many regards, and therefore it's very hard to distinguish oneself from another. And at a young age, I don't think an employer will be looking for a list of prior experience, completed projects, or a glittering enclave of personal accolades and awards. And if they are, I'd suggest you avoid them. I think good employers will be looking for skills that they're able to develop and build upon. And the best skill in life, in my opinion, is a good attitude. Most people in your position are capable of learning new skills, molding to different scenarios. The key is showing will and determination to learn. Do you show up on time? Are you open to learning? And do you seek opportunity? And the economic conditions at present are challenging for us all, particularly in the construction industry. So applying, to organizations and businesses can be challenging, but Circling back to networking, try and establish links in a firm or organization you'd like to work in prior to the completion of your degree. And I, for one, don't endorse working for free. I think it excludes those who don't have that luxury. But you're able to attend events where you may be able to grab somebody's ear, sometimes even virtually. My biggest piece of advice is to not be disheartened when searching for your first role post-degree. They take time to find. And most importantly, I do truly believe the right role will find you. And if it takes time, that's a perfectly normal situation to find oneself in.
Fantastic. So yes, keep focused. It's not, it isn't, you're right, it isn't an easy process. I was talking to an architect a couple of weeks ago, and he was talking about the idea of having not a fixed sense of your style, your approach, but certainly kind of having a kind of a sense of your own aesthetic demonstrated in your portfolio, so that from a design perspective, firms can actually see where your influences are, and more to the point where your ideas are potentially taking you. Is that something that you would look for in a portfolio? What do portfolios mean to you?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think portfolios, to me, are an extension of demonstrating those skills, and design and architecture and all elements of design really require a portfolio, because you're cataloging skills that you've put on a paper CV, and you're trying to transpose them into the literal form of a graphic or a visualization or a drawing that surmises. If you say you can draw on a piece of A4 paper as a CV, can you actually do that? In reality, are you a good illustrator, as you say? But I think for me, it's less about stylistically. I think if I look at what I did as a Part 1 student compared to how I design now, I would say I very much have learned just as much in practice as I did at university, and my style and approach to design has changed and shifted and molded. The passion's always been there, but your passion is molded by those that, if you like, nurture you through the various stages of your career. And so a portfolio, I think, should recognize that and catalog that. I still, in my portfolio, have examples of work from my Part 1, and I also have examples of projects I've worked on in practice, because I think it catalogs a journey, and it enables somebody to understand the journey you've been on and will continue to maybe have with them if they are to be your employer.
I like that. I genuinely hadn't thought about, I mean, with the CV, you kind of end up losing some of the stuff off the bottom of the CV. Life gets too busy and too much is going on. Certainly the GCSEs go, don't they? But had that portfolio actually reaching way back to the start of your career, I think is a really interesting, that journey. It's really interesting. Yeah. Also good to look back yourself and think, oh, okay, this has changed. This is a new evolution. Those new entrants, so they're thinking about how they're articulating some of those actually really quite fundamental translatable skills of I'm paraphrasing here, but kind of energy to, the willingness to learn, the willingness to actually kind of take ideas on, work well in the team, all of those sorts of things. Those as a given, thinking about the industry itself and a little bit of crystal ball gazing, or maybe we don't need a crystal ball at all. What should our recent graduates and soon to graduate students be thinking about in terms of current issues, challenges you might be looking at in the industry? You've said a couple of times that there's a lot going on in the construction industry at the moment. So what would help them in that commercial awareness?
Yeah, I think for me, the key challenge in an ever-changing world is the relevance of the architect into the 2030s and beyond. AI will no doubt change contemporary practice. It will open gateways of knowledge to lay people in a way never seen before. So staying relevant is going to be tough, and it's no good fighting against those changes that are coming. It's more about us as a collective utilizing the advancements in technology to improve the way we practice and do business, in my opinion. And I think that also couples itself with legislature, which is constantly improving to tackle, in my opinion, two of the biggest issues of the day: climate change and building safety. And we as designers need to ensure we recognize the value of these changes, implement them accordingly, but also find value in selling ourselves and our services to our potential clients. And that's sometimes, in my view, a failure in a lot of architectural businesses, is that we have all of these skills that we're given and develop in university and in practice, but we're quite often poor at selling them. As I say before, I think if you ask most people on a street, an average street, what does an architect do? They'll say maybe designs an extension for a property, or maybe designs a larger building, a more civic building. But in reality, architects have, as I say, so many different skills that may be useful to potential client bases in ways they had no perception of or understanding of. So that's something I'd like to see younger generations coming into the industry grappling with. How are we able to stay relevant, but also sell our services and ourselves in a more fashionable way, which ultimately improves business and improves our profession.
And you're saying embrace AI in the sense of understand how you can utilize it and help you to navigate the potential threats that it might be raising for the profession.
Indeed. I mean, you look at building regulations, they're an ever-changing edifice of information that one human, and this is not factoring in human error, will never be able to stay on top of. It's impossible. And so utilizing AI when that point is, I'm not saying that point is now, but the technology is improving day by day. Eventually AI will be able to advise. And that's not to say we don't need to have a scrutiny or a mechanism of scrutiny.
Yes, absolutely.
But it's utilizing the power of that information grab and being able to get data and information to ourselves quickly and apply it in practice. That's where I see the opportunity. And I don't feel that it should be viewed as a threat. I think it should be viewed as an opportunity.
Fantastic. We need to wrap up, really, which is a shame, because I've really enjoyed hearing your ideas. And I think the one thing I want to take away from listening to you is that sense of there's an openness. There's there's an openness encouraging people to explore broadly and to think broadly about the opportunities that they could pursue with a qualification in architecture, but also that openness about making connections and seeing the connections between different aspects of practice, but also your communities, your stakeholders, your business partners, etc. And then an openness about being open to developing skills and embracing new challenges and opportunities as your career develops. That's my takeaway from what you've said today. Have you got any kind of response or final words as we round this up?
Yeah, I think absolutely. Openness to ideas is what the world sometimes lacks. And I found that cultural change in place in people is difficult to attain. And sometimes change is not always a good thing. But quite often, as architects and designers, we're trying to propose ideas and solutions to problems that people face, whether that be on a macro or micro scale, whether that be at a town or a city planning level, or looking at someone's well-being in their property. You know, it's really dependent on the situation, but we should encourage that open-minded approach to design, and also an open-minded approach to our careers, and the ability to recognize that you do have a skill set which is able to be applied in so many different facets and organizations, so you don't always need to stay in the same lane. And that's really my take-home message to your students.
That's fantastic. Thank you so much, Matt, for giving up the time for this conversation. Really appreciate it. And continue to enjoy the new job.
Thank you very much. It was a great pleasure.